Hey guys, Chris from Average Eskate Reviews here, and today in this very quick tutorial we're going to be explaining how we slide on electric skateboards. Now, of course, the different boards that you're on, the different wheels that you have are going to essentially have different things that you need to keep in mind when you're sliding with them. For this example, for me personally, I'm going to be using the Evolve Stoke, and Ricky's going to be using the Evolve GTR Carbon with 80 wheels. Now, when we're looking at the board that I like to slide on, which is the Stoke, I've got the 85mm Kawama wheels on there, the orange ones, so middle hardness, not too hard, not too soft. I think they're pretty much perfect in terms of balancing out grip with also being able to slide, especially when you've used them for a bit. Now, when I talk about the way that I slide, please bear in mind that this is the way that we figured it out, and perhaps not the way that you might know how to do it if you already know how to do it. And if you're somebody that's learning, you can take what we tell you with a pinch of salt and try and figure it out for yourself. But this is kind of like a good sort of basis to have when you're jumping out and trying to figure out how to build the confidence to slide your board out. Now, the first thing that I'm going to be touching on is essentially what my feet are doing in terms of where they're positioned on the board. And then from there, I'm going to go on to what my upper body is doing, what my hips are doing, how I'm rotating my entire body to get the slide working. So to kick things off, the foot placement that you have on your board is going to be really, really critical, because that essentially controls how much balance you have, how much control you have over the board, and also how much leverage you're able to generate based on where you put your feet on the different types of deck that you might be trying to slide out with the particular type of board that you have. From there, as a side note, it's also really important to note how tight your trucks are and what maybe even sort of what bushings that you have on the board, because all of these elements will affect how easy or how difficult it is to slide on the board. The looser your trucks are, typically the easier it is to slide. The more tightened up they are, the more difficult you'll find it to be able to get the board to slide out if you're just starting out. Now, my trucks, I've not loosened them up any more than I normally would to be able to get the board to slide out. It's the way that the trucks would be on the Stoke, and it's exactly the same bushings that I'd use if I was just ripping around, so that's just food for thought. But loose is good for sliding, really tight isn't. So when we're looking at my foot positioning on the board, I like to have my foot, the Stoke does have quite a wide deck, so that helps, but I like to have my foot essentially a little bit over the wheels, because I find when I get ready to lean in the position that I'm going to lean in, that gives me the best amount of leverage and also balance to be able to get the board to do what I want it to do. Now, with my back foot, because the Stoke of course has a kick tail, I don't want to have my foot positioned too far back into the board's deck, because that's going to be very difficult, because if I lean too far back, I know the nose of the board is going to go up. So in terms of the cushiony grip tape that's on the back of the Stoke, I like to have my foot roughly around the middle section of that part of the board. So now, as we're cruising and we're getting ready to slide, if I'm kind of like lightly carving or just going in a straight line, the next thing I like to do is almost, the only way I can describe it is, imagine you're trying to take a dump standing. That's the type of body position that really helps. The lower you are, that helps with two things: low center of gravity, but it also means that you're trying to position your body kind of behind the board, but at the same time, in terms of where the weight is in your feet, the front foot that you have at the front of the deck should have the majority of your body's weight as you're just getting into the slide. Normally when I'm doing this, the weight would be around the sides of my foot and also the heel, because I slide the back end of the board out to my right. I ride standard, not goofy. Now, something that I picked up on with doing this type of slide, especially on this particular board, is if your foot is too far forward or you lean too hard on your heel on your leg that's at the front, what happens is the left wheel on the front of the board will dig into the ground a little bit too much. That might cause you to come off the board into a run, hopefully not a fall. So having that foot placed correctly really does help, and it's just a case of practicing this by sliding the board out maybe even 90 degrees, or just finding out how far you can push the back end of the board, even in really deep carves, before the back end starts to slide. Obviously, you want to bear in mind that you want the board to slide out in the carve the same direction you'd slide it out if you were trying to slide the board out into a 180. Now, when we look at the back leg, some of the issues that I had there was sometimes I can find myself putting the balls of my feet in the center of the deck. Essentially, not all of my foot is on the deck of the board. Now, the way I was able to rectify this is just making sure that I tried to have my foot, or rather the bottom of my foot, in as much contact with the deck of the board as possible. So when I used my back foot to really leverage and slide the back end of the board out, I wasn't having the issue of half of my foot slipping off of the deck, which is something that did happen to me while I was learning how to do this the first time. Trying to ensure that you have maximum contact with your feet on the deck of the board will really, really help in terms of getting the back end to slide. Of course, making sure you have shoes that give you really good grip over the deck helps as well, but I don't really find this a big issue. If you've got, shoes that are relatively flat, regardless of what they are, you guys don't rip me for wearing my Timberlands, because I like to use those while I'm doing this. So when you're just getting ready to perform the slide, most of your weight is in your front foot with minimal amount of weight on the back, because you're going to be using that foot to leverage and slide the back end of the board out. The other thing that you need to keep in mind, and another reason why you want to have a fairly low stance, or you want to kind of try and sit back into the board, is because as you swing the board round, the momentum of you moving forward if you're sat back, is going to naturally throw you forward a little bit. So if you're up straight or you're leaning too far forward, that's not what you want. The momentum of throwing the back end of the board out 180 is going to naturally throw you forward, so you'll be back in your correct stance. But it's something that takes a bit of getting used to, and it's just a case of repetition to see how comfortable you get with it. So when you're actually performing the 180 slide, what you're essentially doing is when you get into that seated position that I explained earlier on, and you're keeping note of you want most of the weight in the front leg and just a little bit of weight in the back leg, you're essentially performing like a pivot with your hips, swinging your hips from the position that you're in. If you ride standard or normal like myself, you're swinging 180 degrees the other way, and it's quite, I'm not going to say a violent, but it's quite an aggressive or fast rotation that you do, or a pivot like in basketball, if that's probably a good explanation or good example of what I'm trying to mention. And that's the motion that you perform to get the back end of the board to swing out. And when you do that, naturally the rest of your body will follow, but it's trying to build that confidence because it's a very unnatural motion if it's something you've never practiced before. So just try and keep that in mind, that what you're essentially doing is getting into that stance, bending your knees, and then from there pivoting your hip essentially 180 degrees, and the rest of your body, your arms will follow. It does help if you do kind of like an arm swing in the same direction that your body's going in, to help your entire body to rotate in the direction that you're trying to get it to rotate in. And that's essentially what you need to keep in mind when you're performing this action. But of course, watching the type of surface that you're practicing on, if it's very, very smooth, it is going to be much easier. Like for example, an indoor car park, those surfaces are very, very smooth to be able to perform these slides. If you're practicing on slightly more abrasive surfaces and roads, then it is going to be a little bit more tricky. But just bear that in mind, and hopefully these tips will help you to be able to learn how to get the 180 down. So essentially when you perform the slide, the weight will go from being predominantly in your front foot, and as the board spins back round, you want to then bring the weight back over the deck of the board so you don't find yourself falling over. This is essentially one of the hardest bits to get. Actually getting the board to slide out after a lot of repetition becomes quite easy, but being able to maintain your balance as the board slides out 180 and keep balancing on the deck of the board as it starts to come out of the slide and continue rolling forward, that's the bit that takes a lot of practice. And that's where your confidence really needs to be built, by practicing this in a low stance, somewhere that really doesn't have anything that you can hit. Preferably somewhere that has, like where we're practicing it and showing you how to do this right now, grass on either side with nice smooth surfaces. Doing it somewhere like this really does help. It's nice to know that you have grass on either side of the path and you can kind of aim to fall off onto the grass rather than onto the road. Bear in mind, you might want to do this with pads on, knee pads, elbow pads, gloves, and of course you want to have a helmet on for this. Ignore Ricky because he never wears one. But that's essentially it, guys. It's just a case of repetition. I don't think there's kind of like a golden rule that you can pick up that really helps to be able to land this. But for me, I think it was really trying to learn the difference between where your weight should be when you're actually performing the slide. Having the weight in that front foot and then shifting it back as the board starts to spin round is the really kind of tricky bit to grasp. And then after that, it's just trying to stay on the damn thing after the board spins round in the opposite direction. But this is just a case of practice. And as you get better at it, you can kick the tail the other way around and continue going. But of course, you need to remember that when you do this, if you do get the board to 180, don't floor the accelerator, because obviously the nose of the board is now facing the opposite direction and you don't want to find yourself coming off. This is where if you have a board that can go into reverse, it works pretty nicely. Or if you want to figure out how to go 180 and then 180 again the other way around so you can keep going in a straight line, that again just takes a bit of practice. But hopefully this gives you a bit of insight into how we figured this out. We're still practicing, still trying to get more confident at doing this, but this is essentially the rules and steps that I took to be able to figure it out for myself.
Now, how you doing, guys? Ricky from Average Eskate Reviews, and in this one I'm going to be sort of taking you through the steps that I took to be able to slide my GTR out with the AT wheels. So I was just bored one day, it was during lockdown, and I thought I want to go out and I'll try to slide my board out. So I went up the park, it was on some nice tarmac, and the way that I started to do it was just purely jumping on the board, having my feet in the traditional position that I normally would ride in, with my back foot slightly just off the edge of the board there, just to give me that little bit of a hook on the board to be able to push that back end round, because AT wheels are very, very grippy, especially on the tarmac. So I went up there and was just practicing by going in a straight line, carving in and out, and then just twisting my upper half of my body, leaning in with my back foot to be able to try and swing the board out. And the way that I started off by doing it was just trying to get 90-degree slides at it. So I was just basically going, carving, and just trying to kick the back end out, just trying to find where that biting point was going to be on the board for me. Now, with the AT wheels, you do have to pick up a good bit of speed to be able to get that back end round, because of the wheels just being so sticky and so grippy to the road or the tarmac that you're riding on. So once you've got that 90-degree flick out of the board there, you want to try and pick a little bit more speed up, get a bit more aggressive with those carves, and then whip that back end out as fast as you can to be able to get the 180 down. Now, again, like Chris said, there's various things that I've done very, very similar to the way that he's sliding his board out, like the way that you actually go into like a seat-in position, or the way, as he referred to it, which is a vial, as a dump. But essentially what you want to do is sort of, when you're shifting your weight, you need to sort of lean back, bend your knees so that you're in sort of like a seating position. That way that your weight is behind the board, so you've got enough weight or momentum to be able to push that back end round. The board will, the momentum, shall we say, will naturally just pull you forwards. And then you need to just sort of regain your balance on the board from then on. So it's just one of those things that you just need to go out, practice as much as you can, take it slow to start off with. Of course, wear all the safety gear, if you come off, you're not going to hurt yourself, because it does hurt. And just essentially practice as much as you can, take it nice and easy, and then eventually you will just get it down. It's just one of those things that it just takes a lot of coordination with balance and speed. There's a lot of things that you've got to put together there to be able to get the slide down so that you can get it looking as good as you like. But again, some of the things that I just do, they're very, very similar to Chris, so I don't want to go and talk about exactly the same things that he's talked about, but essentially these are just some of my tips. If you're trying to do it with AT wheels, then this is going to give you a helping hand to be able to get that 180 slide down on your board. So I've been using the knobbly tyres from Evolve. I brought a pair online. The only colour I could get my hands on was pink, unfortunately, so I had to have pink. But I've been testing these wheels out and I really, really do like them. Obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the full review about these two different wheels, because I'd like to talk about the differences from the knobblies to the actual slicks or normal AT tyres that Evolve sell. But essentially what happened was I was sliding the board out, and I've been sliding it out so much now, because with the knobblies you can slide it a little bit easier than the regular AT wheels. And I've worn them down so much now that you could start to see the actual white sort of threading in the AT wheel itself. Was just trying to get a slide out, just do like a power slide or a drift on the board for the video, and all of a sudden back end come out, pop, and that was my tyre completely gone. So I've just had to ride back from where we was filming with a flat back tyre, which wasn't very pleasant. So definitely time to get some new wheels for the board. So there you go, guys. That was a few tips on how to slide your board out and get that 180 down. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't subscribed already, consider doing so you can stay up to date with all the videos that we post. Once again, it's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Take care. Peace.